A white woman's condescension toward the black man seated beside her takes a shocking turn when his true identity is revealed mid-flight. Her prejudice and privilege collide with a reality she never expected, forcing her to confront the depths of her bias. What happens next will astonish even those who've seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Caroline Whitmore, a 48-year-old white woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive pantsuit, boarded the flight from New York to Los Angeles. Her meticulously crafted appearance reflected her personality, confident, assertive, and often intolerably judgmental. As she reached her seat in business class, her brow furrowed. Sitting in the seat next to hers was a black man, casually dressed in a plain t-shirt and jeans. "Is this some kind of mistake?" she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. The man looked up briefly and offered a polite nod before returning his focus to the book in his hands. His calm demeanor seemed to irritate Caroline even more. As she struggled to stow her carry-on luggage, Caroline flagged down a flight attendant. "Excuse me," she said in a sharp tone. "I think there's been an error. I paid for business class. I don't think this seat assignment is correct." The flight attendant, a young woman with a warm smile, checked her tablet. "Ms. Whitmore, your seat assignment is correct. This is seat 4B. Caroline pursed her lips. "Well, it's very cramped here. I'm not sure how I'll manage a 5-hour flight like this." The flight attendant glanced at the man in 4A, who remained silent, flipping a page of his book. "I assure you, all our passengers in business class are seated according to their tickets. Please let me know if you need anything else." Caroline huffed, but reluctantly sat down. She glanced sideways at her seatmate and sighed dramatically, hoping he would take the hint and engage in conversation, or, better yet, offer to switch seats. He did neither. The man finally turned to her with a measured smile. "Is there something I can help you with, ma'am?" Caroline scoffed. "No, it's just unusual. That's all." She turned her attention to her tablet, tapping aggressively on the screen. The plane took off, and for the first hour, Caroline alternated between checking emails and pointedly avoiding eye contact with her seatmate. When the meal service began, her disdain reached a boiling point. As the flight attendant handed the man his tray, Caroline leaned over. "Excuse me, do you have anything more appropriate for a passenger like me? Something more refined?" The man raised an eyebrow at her, but said nothing, cutting into his meal with deliberate calmness. Caroline barely touched hers, too preoccupied with casting sidelong glances at him. 2 hours into the flight, the black man seated beside Caroline opened his laptop. As he began working, intricate graphs and detailed slides filled the screen. Despite herself, Caroline found her gaze drifting over the edge of her tablet. Curiosity piqued. The depth and complexity of the information caught her off guard. It didn't match her assumption of someone casually dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. Her curiosity quickly overrode her disdain. "What is it you do?" she asked abruptly, her tone edging on intrusive. The man turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze with a polite yet guarded expression. He clearly registered the subtle note of condescension in her voice, but didn't react. "I work in international finance," he said simply, turning back to his screen. Caroline blinked, surprised. His calm, measured response made her feel oddly off balance. "Oh, with which company?" she pressed, fishing for details that might help her piece together a clearer picture of him. "Several," he replied without elaboration, his tone neutral. The vagueness of his answer frustrated her. Caroline prided herself on being well-informed, someone who could size people up quickly. His unwillingness to elaborate felt like a challenge, and it only sharpened her curiosity. "Well," she said, flashing a smile so tight it could snap. "I hope they don't expect too much from you. Corporate environments can be demanding." The man chuckled softly, the sound warm, yet slightly dismissive. "I manage," he said, the weight of his confidence shutting down her attempt to patronize him. Before she could formulate a retort, the flight attendant approached. She carried a glass of champagne on a tray, her smile bright. "Mr. Davis, compliments of the captain," she said, handing him the glass. Caroline's jaw tightened as she watched. "Why does he get special treatment?" she asked sharply, unable to mask her irritation. The flight attendant hesitated. "Mr. Davis is one of our Diamond Elite members. He flies with us often." Caroline's cheeks flushed, her frustration bubbling beneath her carefully maintained composure. As the man sipped his champagne, she fell silent, her thoughts racing with assumptions about who he was and why he seemed so unbothered by her hostility. As the plane began its descent, the cabin hummed with the quiet rustle of passengers preparing for landing. Caroline adjusted her seatbelt, her mind wandering back to the peculiar calmness of her seatmate, Malcolm Davis. She still couldn't shake her irritation, though now it was tinged with unease. Then, the captain's voice broke through the intercom, clear and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to acknowledge a very special passenger on board today. Please join me in thanking Mr. Malcolm Davis for his remarkable contributions to international development and philanthropy. It's an honor to have you flying with us." The words hit Caroline like a freight train. She froze, her breath catching as her brain scrambled to connect the dots. Slowly, she turned to the man beside her. Malcolm sat calmly, his expression unreadable, but the faintest hint of a smile played at the corners of his lips. "You?" Caroline's voice cracked, disbelief etched into every syllable. "You're that Malcolm Davis?" He met her gaze, his demeanor unshaken. "I suppose so," he replied modestly, his tone neither boastful nor dismissive. Caroline felt a sudden chill creep over her. Her chest tightened, and the blood seemed to drain from her face as the reality of the situation sank in. The name Malcolm Davis wasn't just familiar, it was iconic. She had read about him in business magazines and seen him lauded in countless articles. A legendary financier, Davis was revered for his work funding educational initiatives in impoverished regions and supporting sustainable development projects worldwide. He was the kind of man others aspired to emulate, a giant in his field and a beacon of humanitarian effort. I didn't realize," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but piercing. "What exactly didn't you realize, ma'am?" She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Her earlier remarks flooded back to her in excruciating detail. The thinly veiled condescension, the presumptions she had made about him. Each one now felt like a dagger to her pride, each more humiliating than the last. For once, Caroline Whitmore was utterly and completely speechless. As the plane landed and passengers began gathering their belongings, Caroline hesitated, unsure of what to say. Malcolm stood and retrieved his bag from the overhead compartment with ease. He turned to her one last time. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his tone kind but firm, "you might want to reconsider how you judge people based on appearances. You never know who you're sitting next to." With that, he walked down the aisle, leaving Caroline standing in stunned silence. She watched as the flight crew and even a few passengers greeted him warmly, clearly aware of his reputation. For the first time in years, Caroline felt truly ashamed. She exited the plane quietly, her confidence shaken. As she waited for her luggage, she noticed a young black boy staring up at a large poster in the terminal. It was Malcolm Davis, smiling alongside a group of children in a village school he had helped fund. Caroline sighed, her reflection staring back at her in the glossy surface of the poster. Maybe it was time to rethink a few things.